Welcome all of you in the course Ethics Theories and Applications. Our today's topic is Nature and Scope of Ethics Part 1. In this topic, today I am discussing some of the topics. They are: what is the nature of ethics and morality, moral dilemma, understanding moral law, source of morality. The word ethics has its etymological origins in the Greek word ethos, which captures the idea of the science of morals. Moral or morality comes from the Latin mors and signifies concepts such as custom, behavior, conduct. Therefore, insofar as the etymological origins of the term ethics are concerned, it becomes clear that the discipline of ethics is concerned with morality and involves a philosophical study of human moral conduct and human moral behavior. In short, ethics may be understood as the science of morality or moral philosophy. So, the immediate question to ask here would be, what is a moral? Right from our childhood, we have been constantly taught by our parents, guardians, teachers, elders that do what is right, be moral, do not do things that are immoral, build a moral and good character, and so on. Many of these teachings were presented to us in the form of stories, myths, injunctions, anecdotes, which usually carried an underlying moral or an underlying message, which was intended to make us understand what is good, what is right, what is valuable, who is a good person, what is considered to be good conduct. Essentially, in their own different ways, all these teachings were meant to make us understand what ought to be done and what ought not to be done. Following this traditional way of imparting moral knowledge, let us begin by citing certain stories, myths, incidents, which would help you orient yourself and reflect upon the ideas of morality, rightness, good and value. The epic Mahabharata, written by Vedavyas, contains an incident which revolves around the selection of the successor of King Dhritarashtra. Yudhishthir and Duryodhana were the two most eligible candidates. On the day of the selection, Bhishma organized a kind of a test. He called 4 individuals, each of whom came from a particular caste of Varna: Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya and Shudra. Now, all these individuals had committed the same crime of stealing. Both Duryodhana and Yudhishthir were asked to decide the rightful punishment for each and pronounce a just judgment. Duryodhana asserted that since all 4 persons have committed the exactly same crime, all of them should be punished in the exact same manner. It is the moral position or moral outlook given by or presented by Duryodhana. Yudhishthir, on the other hand, explained that since all 4 individuals come from different backgrounds, therefore their crimes need to be viewed as being committed under different conditions and contexts. He explained that the individual belonging to the Brahmin Varna has sufficient knowledge of rightness and wrongness and should therefore be given the highest grade of punishment, whereas the individual belonging to the Shudra Varna has no exposure to moral knowledge and should therefore be punished the least. So, the variability in these judgments is quite evident. While Duryodhana focused on merely the act to decide whether it was right or wrong, on the other hand, Yudhishthir also took into consideration the context and the situatedness of the individual involved in the act to decide its moral worth. Let us take another example, again from the epic Mahabharata. Arjun's dilemma in the battlefield of Kurukshetra, where the Kauravas and the Pandavas entered into a battle. Arjun is a Kshatriya whose dharma was the protection of righteousness, of justice. However, he found himself fighting against his own relatives. On seeing his own relatives in the opposite camp, Arjun is left confused and anxious. For his duty as a Kshatriya demands him to slay his own kin, his own relatives, his teachers, his brothers. Arjun is unable to decide. He asks Krishna, "What should I do? What is the right thing to do? Killing your relatives, your kins, is immoral, but not protecting justice is equally immoral." Arjun's moral dilemma here represents a tussle between the care perspective and the deontological principle. Krishna advises Arjuna to perform his dharma, his duty, the duty sanctioned to him as a Kshatriya, a warrior, the protector of justice. I take my next example from the movie Ship of Theseus. One of the characters in that film is a Jain monk who dedicatedly practices the Jain teachings of non-violence and mercy and fights a legal battle against medicine manufacturers for the cruelty done on animals to test medicines and vaccines. The twist in the story comes when this Jain sadhu, this Jain monk, is himself diagnosed with a fatal disease which can only be cured with the help of medications. Post his diagnosis, the sadhu engages in in-depth dialogues with a young fellow on what would be the moral thing to do in such a situation. Would it be right to sacrifice the life of another if your own life was in danger? Would it be moral to commit an act of violence to save yourself? Would it be moral to retract from your most deep-rooted moral principles and beliefs to save yourself? A similar instance occurred in the life of Gandhiji as well. Gandhiji was a firm practitioner of the belief that we should use only as much natural resources as are necessary, and that too without harming other fellow sentient beings and without degrading Mother Nature itself. Given his mass following, Gandhiji was once requested by the government officials and other fellow persons to appeal in favor of the vaccine for smallpox or Chechak. Gandhiji most clearly refused the request, but again to decide what to do and to choose between the value of life and the greatest good of the greatest number must have been an extremely difficult moral dilemma for him as well. In recent times, we all must have observed how natural resources, natural habitats, forests, animals, humans have been affected due to their rampant misuse for infrastructural development. The growing demand for land for housing, factories, building of dams and so on has led to extremely large scale displacement of animals and native individuals. Entire forests have been cleared, leading to the extinction of rare vegetation, animal and plant species. Even cultural practices have been lost. Those displaced are usually offered compensation in such situations. What one may ask, can any amount of compensation replenish the resources that are lost? Here again there is a tussle between the value which is inherent to life and nature and the greatest good or greatest profit of the greatest number of humans. If we reflect closely on these examples, we would find that morality is a very complex affair. Deciding what is the right course of action in most situations of life is hardly a simple matter. These dilemmas require us to construct extremely detailed reasoning by taking into consideration endless possibilities and a variety of principles, be it metaphysical, religious, cultural, economic, social, political. In trying to decide, we usually find that we are ourselves aware of a number of universal moral precepts and injunctions. For example, killing is wrong, do not harm anyone, be honest, and so on. But at the same time, these objective dictums, these objective precepts have to be subjectively analyzed and utilized. What sense do we make of the moral laws then? Are they absolutely objective or are they subjective? For it is ultimately the subject who has to decide what ought to be done. Even more importantly, one may ask, is morality a fixed set of rules applicable across ages and across differences of cultures and times, or is it something which is dynamic? Is it something which changes with times and across cultures? Isn't our conception of morality changing and evolving? Perhaps the criteria on the basis of which Gandhiji and Arjun were deciding the moral course of action has become redundant now, or are we still following the same set of values? The philosophical study of morality can be seen as revolving around a vast variety of concepts and moral principles. For instance, the concept of Sthit Pragya, Nishkam Karma, and Loka Sangraha in Bhagavad Gita as presented by Krishna, the concept of Jin in Jainism, the concept of Bodhisattva in Buddhism, the concept of conscience proposed by Occam, Logos for the Stoics, the a priori categorical imperative of Kant, the eudaimonia of Aristotle, the concept of right reason given by Hobbes, and that of conscientious feelings of mankind proposed by John Stuart Mill. Most of these principles are proposed in response to the question of what ought to be done. They are proposed to furnish us with the criteria of deciding what is moral and what is not. Ethics as a discipline therefore not only deals with answering the questions of what is morality, but also engages in understanding why a particular course of action is considered to be moral. It thereby also constitutes a study of the principles and criterion which lie at the foundation of moral values and moral judgments. Those principles which allow us to determine what is right, what is good, what is valuable. The subject matter of ethics are voluntary human actions. Those actions or movements which are not carried out by human agents willfully and deliberately cannot be the subjects of praise or blame. They cannot be judged in terms of being good or bad, right or wrong. For instance, the act blinking one's eyes insofar as it occurs as a reflex movement cannot be appraised or judged in terms of warrant and rightness. However, a deliberately carried out movement, an action such as raising one's hand or restraining someone else's movement may become the subject of deliberation about their warrant and rightness. Ethics deals only with those actions that done intentionally and deliberately. Ethics should not be viewed as a set of moral codes. It needs to be distinguished from morality. For morality is the set of beliefs and practices about good and evil, right and wrong, by means of which we guide our behavior. Ethics, on the other hand, can be understood as a second order philosophical inquiry on the nature, presuppositions, and foundations of those beliefs and laws of conduct. So, rather than simply engaging with the question of what ought to be done, ethical inquiries also try to analyze why it ought to be done, why something is pronounced as good, what are the reasons for calling an act virtuous or vicious, why we need to be moral, who a moral agent is, and so on. Such an inquiry is grounded in critical analysis and philosophical reasoning about the concepts, ideas, and principles that lie at the very foundation of moral precepts and dictums. Ethics may also be understood as a science, for it consists in a body of reasoned truths organized in a logical order, having specific material and formal objects. It is the science of what humans ought to be, how they ought to behave, how they ought to interact, and conduct themselves as conscious agents who can freely choose and decide from among given alternatives and make judgments about what is valuable and rightful. The discipline of ethics also presents itself as a rational science insofar as its principles are deduced by humans by engaging in deliberate reasoning concerning the matters of free will. Based on the kind of subject matter it engages with, ethics may be classified as theoretical or practical. It is theoretical in as much as it provides the fundamental principles on the basis of which moral judgments are arrived at. It is practical in as much as it is concerned about an end to be gained and the means of attaining it. Finally, it may also be said to be a normative or regulative science in as much as it helps to regulate and direct human life, giving the right orientation to one's existence. The term law is usually used in the following two senses. One, rule of action, and second, formula. Firstly, it may be used to denote a rule of action which is proclaimed by someone who is in charge of a community, and these laws are usually constructed and brought under practice keeping in view the greater good and harmony of the common people. Based on who the legislator of this law is, it may be classified either as a divine positive law if the sources is believed to be God, or as human positive law in case the source is a human person. Further, based on the kind of common good it aims at achieving, the human positive law may either be identified as civil law, criminal law, commercial law, and so on. These positive laws, insofar as they govern human conduct and action, are also said to be prescriptive. They prescribe a certain course of action, telling us what is to be done, how we are supposed to behave and act. The second sense of the term law denotes a formula which expresses some kind of a standard or constant which is utilized in order to understand the behavior of things or the behavior of persons. So, we may have physical laws such as those which ground studies in physics, chemistry, biology, and other sciences. Sociological or psychological laws which ground the study of persons and their behavior. As against positive laws which is prescriptive, these kinds of laws are called natural laws. Natural laws are not prescriptive, rather they are descriptive. That is, they merely tell us what is the case, much like a statement of facts, without telling us anything about how we are required to conduct ourselves in a given setup. It needs to be pointed out that the exact meaning of the term moral law however, cannot be entirely deduced from or reduced to either of these uses of the term laws. Moral laws have a unique characteristic and they carry with them the idea of an absolute should, or what we may call the ought, which appears as a dictum guiding the moral consciousness of all agents and governing moral conduct as such. Moral principles try to answer the question what we ought to do by telling us that we ought to do that which is right, that which is good, and that we should absolutely avoid doing that which is evil, which is wrong. Most moral precepts or dictum are derived from this core understanding of morality, that is, do good and avoid evil. However, insofar as moral laws are infused in our everyday interactions, they do not merely include certain general dictums or abstract rules of conduct such as do good and avoid evil or life is valuable, but at the same time they also refer to certain concrete precepts which appear as more particular instantiations of those general dictums, such as killing is wrong, do not kill anyone, do not harm animals, do not harm the environment, and so on. Even ongoing ethical debates about the issues of euthanasia, suicide, animal and environmental rights, capital punishment, abortion, all revolve around the general dictum life is valuable. Take for instance the dictum life is valuable or to kill is wrong. Such general moral dictums are clearly not things which we as individuals invent or create, and therefore one may ask, what is the source of these dictums in our lives? Are they part of our very own nature as human beings? Is there a moral faculty that we are born with us? Is morality part of the very essence of human beings, or have these principles been taught to us during our socialization and education? Are they available as divine commands, or are they habits or traits that we gradually develop? If they are traits, then have we learned it through experience or through reasoning, or is it something which comes to be intuitively grasped by all? Some thinkers, for instance Plato, say that humans are by nature moral beings. He holds that virtue and goodness cannot be taught. Rather, for him, it is part of our very nature. While others say that we are not born as absolutely moral or virtuous agents, but that our moral faculties develop in the course of socialization and education, which may involve learning of customs, observing and imbibing what our elders and teachers do, formulation of habits, reflection on experience, and so on. Subscribing to such a view, Aristotle would say that virtue cannot be inculcated through education and habit. All deontological theorists would insist that there must exist some rule or law which enforces moral value onto our acts, and that such a law is naturally available to each person and can be intuitively known. Mahatma Gandhi, for instance, upheld the idea that non-violence is part of our very nature. In stark contrast, Hobbes argues that humans are essentially violent creatures. He explains that it is in fact the inherent fear of death and the tendency to save oneself which forces individuals to enter into a social contract. As per the contract, individuals surrender some of their liberties to a state, and it is the state which frames laws, making it obligatory for all individuals to comply by them. For Hobbes, then social contract appears to be the very source of morality. Apart from the question of the sources of morality, other significant questions concern how the general moral dictums come to be universally known and followed? How are the general dictums particularized? And how particular principles come to be derived from the general maxims? Why are there differences and disagreements in individual and specific judgments concerning moral value and moral worth? We will discuss these issues, these questions in our subsequent lecture. Please think over it. Thank you.